End of Watch is a movie about two police officers who serve to protect in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Los Angeles. The two main characters are police officers Mike and Brian. Their wives also play scripted roles. The officers have been friends for a very long time and have a very open relationship with one another. They like to interact with the other police officers in a very comedic way, but they're in a constant battle with a Mexican drug cartel. We chose this movie because it can show a lot of emotions that are different than what one would see if they're watching a normal romantic movie. This movie just has a different feel when it comes to the emotions. We'll look more into pride, sadness, anger, happiness, and love and liking, as well as concepts like interpersonal elicitation of emotions, socialization of emotional communication, and emotions as interpersonal communication. Pride is something that can be seen in this movie when Mike and Brian show how proud they are to be doing what they're doing. They never back down from any situation, and they actually prefer to be the officers that are on call to any extreme situation. In the movie, there are two involved with the shootouts with criminals, and as a result of the death of one of the criminals, it was an intense moment, but one of the things to note is Mike and Brian sort of do this thing where they get close to one another, almost in a hugging position. They basically hype each other up and say things like, "You did it, good job, you got this." This shows pride because they constantly are showing approval to one another. There's also a situation in which Mike and Brian show their pride by going into a house that's on fire to save children. Brian doesn't initially agree, but he puts his pride to work and goes in the house anyway, instead of waiting on the fire team. This resulted in huge approval in one another and also prestigious police recognition. Sadness can be seen in this movie on several different accounts. It can be seen in the movie whether Mike and Brian go into a house and find several people held hostage in a room that's blocked off by a sheet. You see the sadness in these people because you never once hear the hostages speak. You really don't see them interacting with one another. Also, when you look at their faces, it just tells a sad story. These things can show that sadness because of the lack of social interaction these hostages are having to deal with. Sadness and lack of social interaction can also be seen at the end of the movie when you see the shocking fact that Mike died as a result of protecting Brian. Brian, during the funeral, becomes this person that has difficulty getting words out of his mouth. You also see the unfulfilled contact by Brian as he just sits there mourning and his wife is just holding him. Brian seems to have no intention on holding her back. Anger is evident throughout this movie in the sense that Mike and Brian are exposed to several situations where anger can be triggered. Anger is known to be a social emotion that is felt when an expression and experience are combined. A scene where this occurs is when Mike and Brian entered a suspicious home and came across human trafficking and other humane situations. Anger is also an emotion that's represented through clusters. In this film, clusters of emotion that were expressed with anger was commonly discussed. Whether it were the scenes of uncovering bodies or witnessing decapitations, it's clear that Mike and Brian initially showed disgust in the way their bodies were found, and they express it in their anger. Another way anger is expressed in the movie is through physical aggression and violence. A significant scene is where this is evident is when the gang members decide to ambush Brian and Mike because they felt disrespected and insulted. This film does an excellent job of portraying how anger can be a strong emotion and can be expressed in many ways. Happiness throughout the movie, there's also very prominent presence of happiness and joy. Between the two main characters and their fellow officers, there's happiness and a sense of camaraderie between them all. They exchange smiles and giggles that bring out a feeling of happiness in all of them. They're smiling and giggling almost the entire time these two were together being partners. They both responded to their happiness very similarly, which was with large smiles and cheesy grins. Often their happiness would lead into many other emotions, like the love that they had for one another, etc. The movie within this movie also related to an exciting and new adventure for one of the two men. Things such as getting married and having a baby, and exciting things like that. Love and liking were very present and powerful emotions in the film. The two main characters and Brian expressed their closeness towards one another throughout the entire film, building and maintaining their close relationship with every conversation. While the connection between them is not is the focal point of the film, there was also romance on display. We're introduced to Mike's pregnant wife at a quinceañera. Mike and his wife have been together since they were in high school, and it's apparent in the way that they present their body language and speak to each other that they've been together for a long, long time. On the other hand, we get to see the very beginnings of a relationship between Mike and his love interest, Janet. While Mike talks about Janet to his partner, establishing verbal liking, we can see joyful facial expressions and up-tempo speech, indicating that he's interested in her romantically. They decide to formally express their love to one another by getting married towards the end of the film. Although love and liking were not the primary emotions trying to be elicited by this film, they were essential to change up the speed of an otherwise intense crime-fighting action movie. Socialization of emotion is a concept that evidently used in the film End of Watch. This concept shows that people manage their emotions throughout the movie. For instance, socialization possesses focus on how some emotions are naturally inherited at birth. So when we witness emotions such as anger, sadness, pride throughout the movie, these are all emotions that are learned after birth by influencers. Influencers would be people like parents, teachers, babysitters, etc. This is applicable to Mike and Brian because as police officers, their job is to protect the law. Therefore, whether it was from their parents, teachers, or higher up in command, they were taught what was right and what was wrong. Another way people manage their emotions is by using display rules. Display rules are responses that are modified for emotional display. Scenes where display rules are evident in the film when Mike and Brian are put in dangerous scenarios. They use minimization to portray less fear than they're actually experiencing. The second concept we analyzed was emotions and interpersonal communication. Throughout this entire film, every single person that plays in this movie applies this concept to communicate through their emotions. When they're happy, they smile and they giggle. Anger is normally followed by high, harsher voices and physical aggression during this movie. In the very last part of the film, when they lay Mike to rest after he's been brutally murdered while over Brian's body, we see the concept all over Brian's face at the funeral. The shame he expresses in the scene is heavy, and as he mourns his best friend next to his wife and new baby, while having to live with the fact that it should have been him in that casket. The final concept analyzed was interpersonal elicitations of emotion. There were tons of scenes that brought different factors to elicit different emotions. The first example of this would be when the two officers get out of their squad car and have to gun down a suspect fleeing from them. The fact that the two different sides both intended to use lethal force at the end of this altercation brought an extremely high level of fear. You can detect the fear in the suspect's eyes because they're wide open like a deer in the headlights. One of the final and most intense examples of factors that led to the elicitation of emotions would be at the end of the film when Mike's partner was gunned down in front of him while he himself was incapacitated from gunshot wounds. The action of watching his partner and best friend die right in front of him elicited intense grief and sadness, which could be seen by Mike crying uncontrollably at Brian's funeral. The sense of sadness, tragedy, and shared loss was overwhelmingly powerful at the closing scene of this film. To conclude, End of Watch is about two police officers, Mike and Brian, who serve to protect one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Los Angeles. There were several emotions that could be seen in the movie, along with reasons as to why the emotions are shown. Pride, sadness, anger, happiness, and love and liking were analyzed throughout the film. We also experienced and analyzed different concepts like emotional elicitation of emotions, emotions as interpersonal communications, and socialization of emotional communication.